Hi, in this session we're going to talk about Scriptless, Codeless and visual programming and how it is implemented in Rapise Visual Language. My name is Alexey Grinevich from Rapise team at Inflectra. If you have any questions during or after this session, please use the chat window for this workshop. The first ever computer program was published by Lady Ada Lovelace, the daughter of famous British poet Lord Byron, back in 1843. The way it was published, this program looked as a table with some mathematical formulas and logic in it. Math formulas were essential since this program was solving mathematical problem of calculating so-called Bernoulli numbers. The history knows many ways of representing computer programs, starting from opcodes and punch cards and up to voice programming these days. Historically, programs were written by people with deep mathematical background, because these programs were intended to find some solution, some number, or to get some secret sequence. While these days the range of tasks for computers is much wider, including video processing, music and audio, information systems, communication, and many more. So the general trend in computer language design is to make it friendly for people with non-mathematical background. And one of many other scripting approaches is visual programming, where program or script is represented as a graph or diagram or table or grid. And RVL, that stands for Rapise Visual Language, represents grid-like scripting approach. Let's have a look at it. Right here we can see new empty Rapise script. It looks like a table or grid with 8 columns. In this format similar to so-called DDT, data-driven testing approaches, KDT, keyword-driven testing approaches, or ADT, action-driven testing approaches. Actually, it is a fusion of all these approaches. And let us see it in more detail. The simplest way to shorten the learning curve and to see the working script is to use recording capability built into Rapise. I hit record button. Here you see an application I'm going to work with. This is a medical recording system. And right now I'm only going to record login and logout steps. Click on username, type username nurse, click on password, type nurse123 and hit login, keep location the same, and then do logout. That's it. The steps I did are reflected in the recording activity window, and now each step will be converted to corresponding RVL action. Let's see how it looks. It asks me where to insert recorded steps. In this case, I'm just inserting them right here in the beginning. We have just 4 rows. Each row represents an action. Action uses object. This is something captured during the recording. For example, username is input text field. I may see it in the object tree. Here on the left is a tree of all captured objects. Also, I may find it on the screen using Flash. Here it is. So after object there goes an action. Action is usually object specific. So for this text field there is doSetText action as well as many other actions that are possible. But these are more generic, and doSetText is the most common for text fields. And last three columns represent a parameter that we pass into this action. In this case, it has just one parameter, and it may look a bit redundant to have three columns for that. But a bit later, you will see how it allows to enable real data-driven testing scenarios. So these three columns here are for the purpose. The goal of data-driven test is to improve the coverage through reuse of the same functionality with different input data. Here what we have. The test uses two values to input data into username and password field, and finally does login and logout. We may repeat this operation for different users to make sure all of them are able to log in. And this would enable data-driven testing. In Rapise, I'm going to first time use the flow column for this purpose. The flow column enables different special needs that you may need during scripting. This includes branching, like if, else, looping, and map. Map is used in Rapise to define some set of data that may be fed into the test. In this case, the data contains several rows of data. I'm assigning a name for this data table. It would be users. Now I'm defining column names. It would be login and password. I'm removing redundant columns, won't use them for now, and defining some input values. So there is at least two users that I may use, like doctor, password, and admin 123. So now I have data defined in a table, and I have these input values that I want to use this input data as a source. And it's time to use these additional columns. If I choose a drop down here for param type, I can see a number of options, and in the beginning it lists different types that I may use: string, number, or boolean. I may refer to variable. I may have additional special values and password encryption for the field. I may use it later to encrypt these passwords to not be readable from this source. And finally, I have users, which is actually a name of the map. So this would mean that the param type is users, and now param value is a column name from this table. In very similar way, I may now use password and read its value from the password column in this table. And I'm all set to execute what I have. I'm saving this script and playing it. So what you may see, it enters the doctor, which is the first row from this table. Now my need is to use all rows from this table, so I need to loop through these values. And it's time to use the flow column again, and I have a loop here. This is what I need. But instead of specifying loop this way, I want to say that the loop should include statements in this selected area. So I'm selecting this range, doing right click and choosing wrap selection into loop. The loop appears around these statements. And now my goal is to link this loop to this map. So I'm choosing the type of loop map. This means iterate through the rows of this map. And choosing the name of the map. It's suggested and it's users. Now I'm playing the same script, and it should do 2 iterations for the first row and for the second row. So it entered as doctor first, and then it entered as admin. Now I may add as many rows as needed to specify more data. This is embedded way to specify data right in RVL, and it's very handy when you start developing your script. Later on, you may want to use external data sources such as database or external spreadsheet. For this case, what you need to do is just change the type of the map. Currently it's rows, and it may become range, which means external Excel spreadsheet, and database, which would take data from database. At this point, we will stay with this embedded type of the map. Keyword-driven testing improves maintainability and reuse of the code through the introduction of custom application-specific actions. And this is what we plan to do right now. So here is what we plan to do. In our application, we have a region, location, which may be chosen before doing login. Before now, we didn't do any choice for the location, but we want to do it. And we want different users to use different locations when logging in. So basically, I am going to specify additional column here and define different locations for these users. For example, let's give doctor access to isolation ward, and let's admin log into the registration desk. Now I'm going to define a keyword using one of the ways that Rapise provides. I'm adding a sheet and we'll name it select location. This sheet would accept input value that is defined as a variable, and I'll call it, for example, log or location, whatever. Let me define some default value. So I'm choosing real default value. In this case, when this script is ready, I'll be able to execute it without need to execute this parent script. So having good default values is always good practice for future maintainability. And as a mocking step, I'm adding an operation tester. Tester is one of global objects. I'm going to do message and say something to do select location. So it's just a wireframe or mock or template for future implementation of select location logic. As I said, it may be a bit complicated. This means it would take like 5 or maybe 10 rows, or maybe more, or maybe a bit less. So we want to keep this initial script concise and short, and I'm going to add a call to this new keyword here. In this case, I'm going to use an object RVL that has an action do play sheet. So this is a sheet in RVL, and I'm going to execute it in this point. So there are two ways to do it. With RVL, I may either choose this object here, RVL, and then choose an action using this dropdown, or alternative way that I'm going to apply now is I'm dragging this operation from the object tree to this row, and it gets inserted in the corresponding place. Now I'm choosing the sheet I need, select location. Now you see I added 2 lines for calling this keyword or this operation or this sheet, which is the same in this context. And the second line is needed to specify location I'm going to pass into this call. You see, I'm clicking on drop down and it says me which local variables are defined in this script. I'm pressing tab. The value would have type, I'm going to take it from the map. So I'm going to choose users here, and the column is location. So now I have the location selector defined here using 2 rows instead of how many rows I will need to actually implement it. As a side note, it's worth to notice that if we go back to the history I was telling in the beginning of this talk, you remember that Ada Lovelace published her program back in 1843, while the first computer that were actually able to execute it appeared more than 100 years after. Anyway, this program is clear and useful, and this is a feature that we want to keep in our programs and in RVL in particular. This means that when we look at this script that we have currently on the screen, it should be clear and readable. Why this is important? Suppose that you are working with a real test set. You implemented it long ago, and you have to return to some test case days or weeks or months or even years after it was implemented. And sometimes it takes really much time to figure out what this particular script were doing. So if it's clear and readable, that would save your time in the future when you will try to understand what's going on the screen and probably fix something. If, for example, login is changed by developers. So currently I have this keyword defined using additional sheet, and I have it already applied to this script. If I play it right now, let me play just one iteration using this piece. It is not going to choose location actually, but it is going to write this to-do message to the report. And my next step would be to implement this selection of the location. You see, I have to-do here, and my plan is to implement this to-do when I proceed working on this test. Now I'm going to implement this select location keyword. So I'm going to select location sheet and we'll now do some recording activity. What I'm planning to do is to learn these buttons. In the recording activity dialog there is a button, learn. I may use it this way, click on it, and then click on the object. It says click an object to be learned. And this object gets recognized by the recording activity window. Alternative way is to use keyboard shortcut. So I'm planning to use Ctrl 2 to learn isolation word. So I'm hitting Ctrl 2 and it gets learned also. And I'm going to use the same way to quickly learn the rest. Ctrl 2, Ctrl 2, Ctrl 2 and Ctrl 2. That's it. Hitting finish. So you may see that all the locations are now part of this object tree. So we know them. Now what we want to do is to click on the corresponding object based on the value of this variable. So the most straightforward, not the shortest, but straightforward way is to use direct if and else command. In the left flow column, we can choose if, hit tab. When I hit tab, it makes auto-completion and pre-fills the whole statement for me. I'm going to compare the value of variable with some predefined value. So param1 for comparison is variable and variable name is log. And I want to check that log is, let me see what the first location is. The log is equal to impatient word. I'm copying this expected value and putting it here. Now, if it's impatient word, then what I'm going to do, I'm going to just click, where is it? Here it is. Impatient word, do click. This is what I'm doing in this case. So I have one statement that would click impatient word if location is equal to impatient word. Now I'm going to add alternative branches. So I'm adding else if, hitting tab, again same parameter, variable, log. See, I'm starting to use keyword just to quickly type values because auto-completion saves a lot of time compared to selection it using just mouse. Although if you prefer, you may still use mouse. And the expected value is the second location. Let it be isolation word. Now again, finding isolation word here and adding the click. Proceed the same way. Else if, next location is laboratory, copy it, paste here, make sure there, you see there's one white space symbol, I don't want it, so I used F2. This is a good trick. If I press cursor keys up, down, by default this grid editor goes to the next or previous cell. Sometimes I want to use cursor keys to position cursor within the current editor cell. So I'm hitting F2 and in this case the cursor behaves as a cursor of text editor, not as a cursor of the whole grid. Removing the white space, laboratory, and use... oh, I'm using wrong place. Removing this, putting it here, and second parameter is lock. Okay, so I'm proceeding the same way. It is laboratory, do click. As if pharmacy, and then it will be a registration desk. Pharmacy. You see, I'm trying to use copy-paste, and it's always a good idea to use it. Even if you know this word, if you may quickly type this word, if this word comes from application, it's safer to use copy-paste. It may save some time in the future. Okay, next and last statement is registration desk. So I'm going to use it here, and here is variable, lock, and registration desk, do click. So now I have full location chooser implemented in pure RVL without any special tricks, without any coding. I'm just going to remove this to do because it's not actual anymore. And here it is. I may make this script a bit shorter by applying a couple of tricks. And first of all, I may remove these comments. And second trick I may use is I may use shorten condition syntax where the second parameter goes on the same line as condition. So I may put param2 here. Like that. And remove this row. So in this case, each if block takes just 3 rows, 2 for condition and 1 for action. It's not really required, but sometimes it's useful. I'm not going to apply to the whole sheet because this whole sheet is devoted to this selection statement, and there is more than enough place for that, even with comments. But sometimes with bigger selectors and with more advanced logic, these kind of tricks intended to reduce the size of the script may be really useful. Okay, so now I expect that doctor will log in into isolation ward while admin would log into the registration desk. So bingo, we have it implemented. To summarize, we just recorded a test scenario, then we made it data-driven, then we added a custom keyword, and it all were done only using capabilities of Rapise Visual Language. I am Alexei from Team Rapise at Inflectra. Thank you for joining me today.